So hello everyone, my name is Masha. I am representing Drofa Comms today. So we are a PR and communications agency for financial services and fintech brands. So today I'm going to talk a lot about PR and communications, and I will be very specific in terms of PR and communications for each stage of a company. But let me start with something a bit more broad than just PR and communications, and that is reputation capital. So in terms of, PR and communications is just a part of reputation capital, and reputation capital is basically everything that the company produces, and it's basically a sum of intellectual property that a brand and a company produces, and that involves much more than just communication. So it is also your HR brand, that is your customer support and customer service. So the way you talk to your customers directly, that also involves the network of your founders and your social media presence. And basically it's everything that pops into a person's head when they're thinking about your brand and they're thinking about the product that you have. So and it also involves corporate social responsibility. However, I feel that it's a different topic and it's probably not talking about enough. However, in terms of financial PR and fintech, it's also quite important. So the thing about reputation capital is that every company needs to understand that it's going to be there. And you'd better control it from early stage, and because it's still going to be there out in the market. People will still have opinions about your brand and opinions about your product, and the earlier you start controlling that, the easier it will be to progress with your PR and communications in the future. So the way to control what people are talking about you is to build a cohesive and well-structured communication strategy for your brand, and that will give you the third-party validation. Basically, third-party validation is the media, usually the media. I mean, it could be your network as well, but building media presence is sometimes much more easier than building a great and big networking so that they start actually talking about you. And that is probably one of the biggest difference between marketing and PR. So when you're building your marketing strategy, is you talking about yourself, and building a communication strategy is making others talking about you. And that brings validation to the table, and that brings trust to the table as well. So now I will share some of the myths that do exist out there. So first that I'd like to address is that PR and communications is only important during the times of crisis. And unfortunately, many brands do approach PR companies only when they stumble upon something that they need to solve. However, the analogy that I like to bring here is the networking as well. You cannot really address your network only in the terms of crisis. You've got to leverage that. You've got to communicate clearly and consistently with the people you know throughout the whole time. And only then it will help you during the crisis times. And the same thing happens with PR, because communicating with the media and showcasing what important you bring to the table and what your product is, who your founders are, is important to do monthly, and important to do consistently and with the same message and with the same angle. And only when something happens out there, and unfortunately in financial markets, every company can stumble over something that they need to solve. It's not necessarily like a big crisis, but it can be a hack, for example. And here, the media presence and the trust that you have already built with your audience will help you get through that. Second one is that PR should only concern the company's products. Product PR is important, and of course you need to talk about the features, you need to talk about how how different you are from your competition, and participate in awards, for example, and ratings and all that. However, there is another way to build your brand awareness out there, and it's executive communications. So executive communications, it is a strategy when you put a founder or a CEO, any person who has the time and capacity to do that, up the front of the brand. So someone who's going to be representing you, sharing their expertise on the market, and in that way representing the company as someone who knows what they're doing, basically. And in that way, you can bring, again, openness and transparency, because giving a face to the company matters when you want your stakeholders trust you, and it's always the face who they trust, not just the product. So that one really is quite similar to what I have already said. So executive communications, sometimes companies do find it excessive. However, it is, again, something that brings credibility to the table, and in that way you can not only talk about the product but also talk about the values that you have, because the brand is always much more than just a product. Again, it's the mission, it's something that the brand stands for, and something that your company is going to be associated directly with. Like, for example, there is an easy example here. It's like Coca-Cola, for example. When you say Coke, you don't just think about a fizzy drink. You think about Santa, you think about the feeling of Christmas and the lorry that goes around during the times of Christmas. And that is how the brand works. So it is something that pops in people's heads, and you want to work on that. You want to control what people are thinking about you. And that could be your CEO. That could be something that, again, the brand stands for. So fourth one is channels. So media channels. Sometimes companies are only leveraging their media, social media, I mean. And so I would say that the strategic blend of media presence in terms of social media, media outlets, and everything that there is in terms of, again, social media presence and any channel that could be, they needed to be blended into one cohesive strategy. What I mean here is that the most important thing here is to choose the angle and to choose the wording that are going to be associated with the brand. And in that way, you can produce content that can be recycled throughout all the media that you have in your strategy. However, probably companies shouldn't use that as fanatic as they might be, meaning that you always need to realize how much capacity the company has, and how much media presence you can actually work with on a monthly basis. So it's better to have 2 or 3 channels, however, using them consistently and cohesively, rather than have, I don't know, 10, for example, and not paying too much attention to those. So have less, but work in depth with them, rather than have more and not working with them enough. However, I would advise working with at least 2, because one is never enough. And the fifth one that I unfortunately come across far too often is that companies have a B2B product, don't see the value in PR. However, when you work with institutions and clients, for example, here when the trust actually plays a vital role, because obviously well, the pricing of the product with B2B services is obviously much more than a B2C ones. And you're working with companies who are well established, so that, again, they need to understand what value you bring to them. And that is the communications and consistent PR that can help you there. So one PR is a must. And as working with financial services, people need to trust the platforms that they are working with, and not just the people, but institutions as well, but well, any stakeholder that you want to engage with, and any stakeholder that you're going to use as a target audience as well. They need to understand what will happen with their funds. And the same happens with personal data. And this is probably one of the vital kind of areas that you need to take trust as seriously as possible. And again, executive communications and talking about the founders and their track record in the market as well is something that will help in that area. Another type of companies that really need to think about communication and PR is when their product is technically complicated. And usually behind a technically complicated product stands a really in-depth person who knows the product really well. However, it needs to be transcribed to the target audience. They need to understand, so they don't really need to know what stands behind the product. They don't really need to understand how it works. They need to know how they can use that and what pain points are going to be filled in with the product. So, and in that way, the company needs a bridge between the product and between the target audience. So someone who understands the technical features of it and can transcribe that to the wording that the target audience is going to understand. And again, the strategy can be built differently. So for example, if you're targeting a retail user, obviously the wording is going to be really easy to comprehend, and is going to be even educational at some point. And another way, if you're targeting institutions as well, obviously the wording and the language that's going to be used, it needs to be much more professional than that. And basically in that way, you need that person who could do that for you, transcribing the technical features into something that your audience is going to understand. And well, number 3 and 4, I'm going to combine those. When you're targeting something new, for example, you're targeting a new audience within one market, or going to another market abroad and trying to find new clients, for example, all the content that you already have and the product sometimes needs to be localized. Again, it needs to target the person that you're going to bring on board. And sometimes even the strategies that you have before don't really work anymore, so that you need to restructure that and find the right words that are going to be appealing to the person that you're targeting. And of course, when you're seeking investment, again, in that stage, when you're targeting funds or VCs, they are also an audience. They also needs to be communicated to, and there is specific press and specific targeted news outlets that a PR company or a PR person within the company is going to use and work with, and the journalists that are specifically targeting VCs and funds. So now I'm gonna break everything that I'm going to talk about later into 3 stages, and that will be derived from the size of the companies. So I will start with early stage startups and what I feel is the best way to build PR and communication strategies for early stage startups. Well, first of all, it might be not the best idea to start building your communications from the very, very first stages of the company. And there is a very easy reason for that. as PR and communications needs to be consistent, and it needs to be cohesive, and so it needs to be understandable from the media's perspective, and the media needs to see the logic behind your actions. And sometimes sometimes startups on the early stage, they do change the product, they do change their market fit, they do change the way they operate. And it would be much harder for the company on that stage to communicate that to the media if they started doing that early on. So here I would advise to first build in stone everything that you're going to produce in the future. Build an MVP, focus on the product, and also focus on your social media presence, because it's the easiest thing to do. You don't need much resources for that, and it will help you build communications in the future, because it will still give you the presence that you will work on in the future. However, there is a good thing to do, especially if the founder of an early stage startup is a serial entrepreneur. I would advise to build a thought leadership campaign on the person, exactly, because they already have a track record in the industry. They can already showcase what kind of projects, what kind of companies they built before and exited successfully. And in that way, the audience will see the logic in that. So in this case, I would bring the person to the forefront and only then focus on the product when it is already ready, when the platform is ready to onboard new clients, for example, or when you're starting seeking investments, like for round A or C round as well. Because again, as I've already said, VCs are also a target audience, and they also need to be communicated directly through the third party, meaning the press. So yeah, when the company is already on stage A or B, I feel that's the best stage to start building your communications and PR, because the product is already there. You already have the capacity to onboard new clients. You already have the understanding of and the vision of the product for the future, and that's what you're going to communicate to the media, and that's what you're going to communicate to your target audience as well. In that way, you should start by figuring out the exact wording, the exact messages, and the exact positioning for the company. So this is basically the first thing that pops into the heads of your reader. So like, the company is this and that, and it needs to be really short, really concise, and it needs to be inserted into your competition. So start with the in-depth marketing research on who your competitors are, the closest ones, and the ones that you're targeting to be a competitor of in 5 years' time, for example, and figure out the positioning depending on what you find there. Then you should create your media kit, which is the press portrait or bios of your founders, and also the about page. So what the company is, and it's something that the media can assess and access at any time. So it's probably worth putting that in your website as well. Then you need to, and again, not you, of course, it can be an agency, it can be an in-house communication specialist. So anyone who's going to be responsible for your communication. So they need to create a targeted media list, meaning that this is the exact media outlets that you want to appear at, and this is the ones that your target audience is reading. So your job here is to be as known as possible for your target audience. In the PR world, there is a number circulating. So meaning like the number of times that your reader needs to come across your name or your founder's name to trust you. The number is different sometimes. So sometimes people say 7s. I sometimes hear number 13. Obviously, unfortunately, cannot be research based. However, the point here is that you need to appear in their eyes so that they have a feeling that they already know you. And it also eases the process of networking. For example, if your founder is speaking at an event and they appear there, so sometimes they don't even need to introduce themselves because people have a feeling that they know them, however they met for the first time. It also can reduce your sales cycle. And I know that B2B sales cycle can be quite extensive, and PR and cohesive communications can shorten that, giving again the trust so that your potential customer already have the feeling that they trust you. And another important thing here to understand is that the basic QYC, and of course the process is much longer than that, but the first thing that a person does, comes across your brand or meets you in public, they Google you, and you want to control what they see. You want to answer their questions proactively before they even have that in their minds, before they ask you that, because it's much easier to solve that issue before it appears. And that is actually what crisis communications also does, because when you start working with PR, the first thing, again, one of the first things that your PR person will do is to create numerous documents on how to address an issue and how to solve a crisis. And all the crises, all the best crisis communications, they need to be addressed and solved before the public knows about the crisis. So the biggest crisis, probably we just don't know about them because they have already been solved proactively. And the proactiveness of the PR strategy is one of the best things that you can do for your company and for your brand in the future. Usually, when a startup approaches PR, and usually when a startup approaches communications as a whole, is the funding round campaign. And it's usually a round, because at that stage, the company already has the funds and the capability to engage with communications. So as a PR agency, we work on an embargoed press release or announcement in the target media. So it can be an exclusive, it can be a round in interviews around that. So a campaign around a funding round is much more than just a press release. So it's always a consistent number of media channels and media formats that PRs would use. And when talking about the formats, there are quite loads of them. And interestingly, when you're reading the news, sometimes you don't even notice that. For example, the tiniest bit that you always see in news are the quotes and commentaries. When a journalist is writing a big feature, for example, they're always looking for the sources. And it's always important to understand what the journalists are looking for. And they're looking for data, they're looking for opinions, they're looking for something that can base their feature on or a news item on. And in that way, they approach PR companies and they approach people they know themselves, for example, within other companies, and asking them questions. And based on their answers, they're forming not just the feature, but also inserting the sources quote into those features. So sometimes when you're reading an opinion piece and it says, this expert says this and that, and this is what it is. And what I particularly like about quotes is that people who are reading it, obviously people are interested in the news, and they see that this particular journalist trusts that source, trusts that person. So probably me as a reader should as well. There are also in-depth pieces like opinion pieces, for example, how some outlets call them op-eds. They have the capability to provide you with much more space so that you can delve into an expert topic in depth and show what you think about the market. And it's usually considers more of the vision of the market, as I said, or a particular topic that is discussed in the market rather than your product itself. So it's a good point to include into executive communication strategy rather than the product strategy. So yeah, after going back to the funding round campaign, when a funding round campaign ends, and usually takes about like a month and a half, it is important to create the bridge to and transition that to an ongoing PR campaign and the narrative that you're going to use after it. Because after the funding round campaign, you want to support it with any content that you decide to produce, be that only product news or be that executive communications or everything that involves that. And when you do that, it is still important to target your investors, because obviously you're in touch with them. However, they need to see how the product is progressing. They need to see how the business is progressing. Like if you're growing, if you're planning to launch something else. And in that way, the communications between you will be much easier. And obviously you're targeting new customers as well, and new markets, again, depending on the overall business strategy. So yeah, that's one of the best points that I really want to stress on, and I have already mentioned that. PR strategy needs to be proactive, and you want to address every potential crisis before it appears. Every potential question that your investor, your customer, your network might have, you want to address that before that. And be that a tiny issue in your product or some kind of gap in your founder's bio, for example, that may raise questions, you've got to be really transparent with yourself. And you've got to understand what kind of questions, what kind of issues might be raised in the future, and it's better to address them before that. Give them the answers that they will be probably seeking for in the future before they even know about it. So yeah, and after that, when you're finished your round campaign, when you're finished with everything investment wise, there are 4 things that you will probably need to keep in mind to build a consistent PR strategy. So crisis prevention, and again, I've been talking about it for a while already. When you're already in control, you don't need to regain it. And regaining control in terms of the narrative might be very tricky. It might be really difficult, because when the news is already out there, it's very hard to, well, I mean, you cannot take the information back. You need to, when the information is already there, you need to communicate directly with the journalist who published that and give an interview. So it needs to be a really tailored and quite hard campaign on how to go from the crisis news to your usual content, to your usual kind of PR strategy. And that bridge might take a while and might be tricky. So it's much easier to prevent that. And a good PR would do that for you. Building trust and authority. Again, so main target for communications and PR is always brand awareness, is always building relationships with your target audience, and building trust with the community, building trust with your network. So it is basically the same as me talking to you directly, but it is me talking to thousands of people. And that's the way you need to approach PR. So it's you talking to your potential customers and helping others talk about you as well. So basically making your brand famous, making your founder famous in the industry. New market launch. again, already mentioned. So when you're targeting a new audience, you need to recycle everything that you have already produced, localize that, and change that to what kind of language your new target audience is using. And that is probably true for every PR campaign. It needs to be derived from the target audience. You need to derive that from what your audience wants to hear rather than what you want to say. And the bridge here needs to be the other way around rather than from the product to the target audience. So it needs to be the other way around. And maintaining dialogue with the regulators. Regulators is also an audience. And when you're applying for a license, you still need to use regulators as an audience. So talk about your company from a business perspective, again, bringing transparency, however, keeping in mind that that's the regulator who's going to read that and keeping in mind what you want to tell them. So how to maintain strategy and how to be as consistent as you should be. So first of all, it's knowing media landscape, knowing what news outlets your audience consumes and what media and journalists to focus on based on that. So when you're working on the media list that you're going to target, obviously you need to keep in mind what your target audience is reading. Strong relationships with the journalists. So they don't have to praise your product, but they need to be interested. So your job of a PR is to get the interest, so get the attention you deserve, and then you will craft a story and know what they're looking for to capture their attention. So in the end, you just want their interest, and then you need to navigate that interest into something that you're looking for and answer their questions in the way that works well for your PR strategy, but also is interesting for the journalists, because if they're not interested, they just won't going to use it. Keep your eyes peeled for the news agenda. Well, there are some long-lasting discussion trends, and there are certain types of news that you want to jump on, especially if it's a time when you're not launching anything new, but you still want to get the attention from the media. That's the best way to do that. So know what's happening out there, and obviously your PRs have to know what's happening out there and know how to connect the dots, know how to connect your product, your expertise with something that the news agenda is discussing, what journalists are discussing, and they would want your opinion on that. And have the ability to transfer your thoughts and your product and everything that you know in terms of the expertise into something readable and something that your target audience can actually consume, something that they are going to be interested to read. So yeah, and one of the last things to mention is, here are some tips on how to gain trust. How to gain trust from your target audience, of course, your potential customers, your partners, stakeholders, everyone who you would consider a target audience at your particular stage. Avoid jargon, avoid tech language, be as understandable as possible. Keep in mind the person who's going to read it. Sometimes when the audience is professional, it is a good thing to assume that they already understand it. However, if you're targeting a retail audience, assume that they don't understand it, assume that they know nothing about it. So explain everything in a very concise, however understandable language. Provide updates on the product. And that also goes with releasing financial updates and reports. Be as open as possible. And the market values that, your reader values that. Openness goes a long way. So from the early stage, you need to understand what kind of data you can actually share. And in terms of reports, for example, I mean, I obviously think about it as a PR person. However, journalists are very interested in, they're very interested in opinions. And there are so many people out there with great products who don't communicate that clearly. So give them the information and they will value that. However, be very careful, obviously, knowing that the regulator is going to be interested in that as well. And so it probably worth from the very beginning to understand what kind of data your company can release. And especially if you have a retail product, it's worth doing external research and communicating that data of the research with the press, and your retail audience will appreciate that as well. Promoting leaders, again, that goes with thought leadership pieces and executive communications. Have a person who is ready to represent the company, and it will go a long way, and it will help the founder themselves, because sometimes they have not just one but 2 or 3 startups, and it will help them combine the strategies between those, and it will help them have the presence in the media for themselves as well. So in terms of PR, I find that these 3 features are most important when you choose a PR person who will work for you, or you choose an agency who will help you deliver your communication strategy. So PR and the PR strategy needs to be proactive. You need to think ahead. You need to have someone who knows what will happen in the future in terms of the news, and what kind of news you want to hop on in the future in terms of your product and your business strategy. And also, when you're creating a PR strategy, you need to think ahead in terms of the business. So it's worth creating all of your pieces with your company in 5 years' time in mind. So when you're creating your positioning and messaging, for example, create the positioning not just for the company that you have right now, but for the company and the business model that you will have in 5 years' time or 3 years' time. So choose some understandable timeline for that. And in that way, you will not need to change it in the future. You'll not need to pivot, and it will be much more understandable for the media and journalists as well. PR needs to be niche. And here, I mean, we are a very niche PR agency, and you will need to find someone who understands your product very, very well. And unfortunately, some of the PR strategies are delivered on kind of really mass target, meaning that the person who's writing about you doesn't really understand what you do. And that's a big issue and big failure for you, because you need to find someone who both understands what you do, what you stand for, and understands your target audience and what they're looking for. And PR needs to be measured. And this is a tricky bit, because reputation capital, PR, and communications in terms of brand awareness are really hard to measure. However, there are good measurement tools that can be used in that sense. You always need to measure the target audience and the traffic that you are targeting. You always need to measure how much republications, for example, you get from one piece, because when you release an exclusive piece and it goes to a good media, reputable media outlet, it always gets republished and requoted by others, and you need to see what kind of traction you get from it. And you always need to compare what kind of media presence you had before you launched your PR campaign, and what kind of media presence you have after 3 months, 6 months, and a year after you launch that, so that you see the difference and you see the growth in terms of your media presence. There is also a myth However, obviously it's not a myth. However, I mean, communications and PR is related to sales, of course. So it eases the sales process. It can shorten the sales cycle as well. However, unfortunately, there is no direct correlation on that. So it can't really be measured in terms of return of revenue, for example. However, it can be measured in terms of returns of revenue on a really long term. And obviously, PR is always a long-term game. When you started working with the media, when you started working with a journalist, the worst thing that you can do is just to stop doing that. Because when you can get back, and companies need to get back working with the media, they need to explain the gap, and they need to release a series of content talking about what happened with the platform when they haven't been communicating consistently, because there will always be a question raised, not just from the media side, but also from your reader's point. Okay, so to finish all that, let me talk a bit about us and about what we do and what kind of PR we produce. So Drofa is a niche PR agency. We work only with financial services and fintechs. We are a team of 30 people at the moment, 32 to be precise. We're based in the UK and London, let me start again. London, Limassol, I said. So we are a team of 32 people at the moment. We're based in Limassol, Cyprus, and London, UK. We launched in 2011. So we have two co-founders. One co-founder used to be a trader. She has a PhD in economics and really has in-depth knowledge and expertise in the financial field. And the other is used to be a financial journalist. So it all worked well together, and they started working with only traditional financial companies like investment banks and asset managers up until 2017, when we started onboarding fintechs and companies involved in digital assets. And at the moment, the bulk of our portfolio are fintechs and digital assets companies and blockchain solutions. We are members of Forbes Council. Our founder is one of the columnists there, so we're writing for Forbes, and we also hold some of the prestigious awards, which we're really, really proud of. So yeah, we are currently members of Rise, created by Barclays. We joined them this September, which we're really, really happy about. We work with all the top tier media outlets that you can think of. So we work with tier ones like Forbes, Bloomberg, CNBC, Sky News, everything there is. We work with various formats, starting from opinion pieces, interviews, in-depth publications, and short quotes as well, press releases. So any kind of campaign that can exist in the financial services field, we work with them currently, and we've been doing that for 13 years already. And yeah, we also work with the tiny ticket targeted media like Hedgewick, for example. So the ones that are tailored, and their content is tailored to a specific tiny audience. We also work with events, for example. So we prepare speakers to speak at events. We do speech writing for them. We media train them so that we make sure that our speakers are well prepared to everything that the journalist might be interested in. And we teach them to navigate that kind of narrative, and we teach them to divert the attention of the journalists as well. All right, so it was really, really nice presenting to you. Feel free to connect. We also actually launched free consultations. So if you're not sure if you're ready to build your communications presence or media presence, do reach out to me. I'm happy to have a chat, be that virtual or offline at Rise. All right.
First of all, thank you very much for that presentation. I think that was extremely insightful on the world of PR. And probably a lot of founders, especially in the fintech finance space, will probably get a lot of value from that. But I just want to lead on with a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Especially when one thinks of PR, they don't necessarily think of it as marketing and advertising. At least the founders I speak to, they think of it more as complete separate items. But in your opinion and what you've seen in your experience, how does PR integrate with advertising and marketing strategies to create perhaps a cohesive brand message?
Yeah, sure. So that's a really good question. In my experience, they all work together really well. I mean, they can exist separately, of course, depending on the brand, depending on the strategy. However, it's best to embed the whole marketing, advertisement, and communication strategy in the overall business strategy. And we need to include sales as well there, because the messaging needs to be cohesive and the wording needs to be cohesive. And that needs to include all the sales pitches that the company does, all the marketing and advertisement messages as well. Because in terms of advertisement, again, the positioning needs to be the same in terms of communications and PI as well. So that's why they need to work together, as well as I don't know, for example, sponsored materials that companies does. They are also needed to be included in the
Mm,
communication strategies, especially if we're doing a big campaign on a launch, for example. It needs to be cohesive in terms of what kind of content we are promoting on social media, what kind of content we are promoting as sponsored materials in the outlets and media outlets. And that will be also embedded in what kind of content we are pitching to the journalists. And we need to be cohesive, not just in terms of what we're saying, but also in terms of the timeline,
yeah.
because we cannot pitch an embargo, for example, on exclusive if the information is out there, of course. So that's why we need to do first communications bit on the launch and then include marketing into that to lead more leads, for example, to the platform, or depending on what we are trying to achieve there. So if marketing strategy exists within the company overall business strategy, they obviously need to be included into the communication strategy. However, there are cases when companies don't do kind of promotional content at all. They don't do marketing or advertisement, and that's fine as well. And sometimes companies only do marketing and sponsored kind of materials. And I mean, for some companies that works too. However, obviously, if the company has the budget and the capacity to do so, it's better to have all the kind of piles in the strategy.
Fantastic. Okay. Cool. I think that gives some food for thought for a few founders who are probably watching this. But yeah, I want to move on to kind of your specialization at Drofa, right? So you specialize obviously in finance and fintech. How do you tailor PR strategies to meet the unique needs of these sectors?
I would say that well, any PR company who works in a specific field, they need to tailor everything that they do to that specific field, and that's what we do as well. First thing that is very important is that to make sure that your agency understands what you do,
Mm,
and because these are the people who represent you.
yeah.
Obviously, we all agree on the content, we all agree on all the pieces, everything that we produce with the company. However, we're still have an ongoing dialogue with the journalists, and we need to understand how to represent you as best as we can. And to do so, we first need to understand your product really well. We need to be synced in terms of the business strategies as well. We need to understand what the main spokesperson thinks and what their expertise lays within. Because we are ghostwriting for you. And to ghostwrite, it is extremely important to understand your tone of voice, what kind of wording you use as a person, because it needs to be personal. And everything that we write for you, it needs to have a feeling that you did that, not us.
Yeah.
And to do so, we need to be as synced as possible. So yeah, to have a niche, and that's one of the best things that we did as a business as well, because again, we don't need much time to onboard a client as well, because we understand already what's happening in the market, what kind of market gap you're filling in. So it makes it really easy for us to get what you're doing there and what kind of audience you're serving as well, and what kind of wording you need to use to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. And for those perhaps who don't really know what ghostwriting is, could you maybe
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to elaborate. Sorry to use the wording that.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
You should.
Well, ghostwriting is basically so ghostwriters, these are people who are writing for you, and they take up everything that you have in mind, like your expertise, your words, putting that into a readable content, and it gets published for your using your name. So basically, it's all the content that your PR agency will write for you, but it wouldn't have our name, it would have your name. So, and to do that, obviously, because spokespeople don't have much time to do that, and we appreciate because some of the companies that we work with are really engaged into communications and they really want to do that. We're happy is that if that's the case, but it's usually not the case.
Right.
And that's why you need people who would do that for you. And you need the people who understand really well what you're trying to say, what kind of audience you're serving, what kind of words you use in everyday speech as well. And that's why you need to talk to those people as much as you can. And yeah, so ghostwriters are basically people who will write content for you.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. Talking about audience, actually, obviously you guys work, you guys have a global presence, right? So the audience, I'm guessing, is well, it's not guessing. The audience is different in every part of the world. Obviously, there's some similarities between certain countries, but it's different. So, as a PR company, how do you approach strategy differently for international markets, for a specific company, for example?
Yeah, of course. So again, it really depends on the product and depends on the target audience. However, if the company has there are two cases in those scenarios. Basically, there might be a company who would like to approach a global audience. So they have presence in many countries, and it means that they want to reach them on a certain level. And in that case, we would approach kind of global media outlets. So the ones who have representation in many countries and get republished as much as possible. And those ones are usually kind of tier one big publications like Forbes, Bloomberg, Business Insider, Wall Street Journal. So those kind of publications who have representation in many countries, so that we make sure that we reach the target audience on many levels. There might be second kind of case of scenario when you have kind of really localized presence in a bunch of countries. In that case, we'd approach media outlets in certain countries, and we would localize content for those countries specifically. And that involves the language, of course, and that involves as well the wording that each country is used to using, basically.
Right.
So yeah, that's the kind of top level approach to those strategies. Again, sometimes the product might be localized for each country, depending on, like, for example, a company would have retail users in one country and more kind of institutional clients in another country. So in that case, obviously the strategies will be different, not just in terms of the language, but also in terms of all the media and all the content that we use for those.
I think it's very interesting because, as well as that, the users, I'm guessing they receive this in different forms, right? So now with the rise of social media, not the rise of social media, but everyone's consuming content, I would say a large proportion of people are consuming content on social media. How do you feel that the PR world has changed in that regards, maybe in the last few years? And what do you envision that being for the future?
Well, first thing that has been true for quite a while is that you need to understand that every person has different kind of media consumption habits.
Mm,
And you need to tailor your communication strategy for that. For example, some people are more on the audio side, so you've got to use podcasts to serve their needs, and speaking at events as well, or doing webinars, so that kind of content.
yeah,
On the other side, there's always written content. So if, for example, your target audience is more in their 60s, for example, you would want to get into the actual published media.
yeah,
And more serving kind of written content in that sense. In terms of social media, it needs to, I mean, again, it really depends on the strategy. However, we're usually using social media is being kind of, so we're trying to use social media as, so there are two types there. So sometimes you would use personal social media for thought leadership pieces and thought leadership kind of strategies, and also corporate social media for more strategies that are on the product side. And you're trying to link everything there, so to showcase again the transparency and the consistency, because again, social media and everything that social media does is more on the marketing side. And usually it's more included into the marketing strategies rather than in communication strategies. However, the personal social media is usually the first point of verification of a person.
yeah,
And that includes your end user, and that includes the journalist as well. So as a PR company, we've got to make sure that social media of a person that we are doing PR for is tailored to our needs, so that we would create a wholesome image, so that the journalist, when they are first, for example, meeting the person, they will obviously go to their LinkedIn. And I mean, it's just what they do. And we've got to make sure that the expertise and the experience that the person has is also tracked back in the social media that the person has. So that's probably one of the most important things there in terms of social media. But again, it depends on the size of the company, but I would advise to start with your social media, and it's probably the most important thing that you can do, and it's the easiest thing that you can do.
okay. No, I think that's, yeah, I think a lot of people consuming it, even myself, just going on, scrolling on Instagram, you have a lot of companies doing some PR, like for example, even the BBC sometimes is like, this company has this company has that. So that's, I'm guessing that's all PR without realizing it, right?
Of course it is. Of course it is. And sometimes you don't even notice. I mean, many people don't read the actual content there. So as a PR person, we just need to make sure that the company appears there, so
Yeah.
that the number of mention increases. The content is as important as it is, but the number of mentions is as important. Also, some of the LinkedIn articles are also used in Google News, so that, for example, if a person Googles something and they see that, so they would see the LinkedIn articles as well, and it doesn't need to be pitched, so you're just posting that, so that's your personal blog. So do pay attention to that as well.
Yeah, sounds good. And then, so talking about social media, talking about just general PR, for me, it's all about building a strong brand image, right, for the company, right? So how does a well-crafted PR strategy contribute to achieving a brand's long-term goals and sustaining its image?
Well, that's a good question. However, well, it is very broad, and it means that, I mean, everything that PR does is contributing to your brand awareness, and it is contributing to your, as you said, brand image. And the key here is to be as consistent as possible, even if you're changing your target audience, for example, and if you're pivoting, you've got to you've got to have the bridge. You've got to show the logic behind your actions. And that includes not just the consistency in terms of like how much you publish and how many times you appear in Financial Times or any other outlet that you're careful, but it also means that your words and the words that you want to be associated with are directly linked to your product. It is directly linked to what you want to achieve in the future. So always try to put yourself in the shoes of your end reader and what kind of impression that will have when they're reading something about you. And always try to track, you can use quite extensive tools. I mean, we're using Brand24, for example, as our analytical tool, and that is really good in terms of capturing your media presence and capturing the words that are using next to your brand. And you will see the increased usage of a particular word, and you will understand if you're happy with that word and why it appeared there. If it's something that you did, or it is, for example, something that people are talking on Twitter, for example, because it will be there and will track there as well. And in that way, you can influence the flow of those wordings. So again, be as transparent as possible. You don't want other people to think and fantasize about anything. So you don't need to leave the room for fantasy. Be transparent, be consistent, and just be open and see the logic. Let them see the logic behind your actions.
Yeah, so it's kind of what you mentioned in your presentation, right? So you want to take control of your image before it gets out of hand. And maybe talking about the out of hand, it's obviously we talk about brand reputation, but I think PR is also very well known for handling crises, right? And within a company's brand image. So can you share how you guys, Drofa Comms, approach crisis management? I know that's very broad, but
I absolutely. So first thing that a PR company needs to do is to prevent the crisis. And most of the crises that appear there, they could have been prevented. They could have been foreseen in the very, very beginning. So when we start working with a company, when we start working with a client, one of the first things that we do is we get on a call with the business team and the CEO and everyone that we can reach, and get a list of the potential crises that could appear, because most of them, as I said, could have been foreseen, and we find a way to react on it before it even starts. So for example, if a platform gets hacked, every platform knows that they might at some point get hacked. So in that way, they can prepare what kind of blog posts they need to post on their website, what kind of press release they need to issue. So, and those things need to be written beforehand so that you just add up the data if something happens. But again, you need to communicate proactively with the journalist. And if you know that something happened like an hour ago, that's the time when you start pitching before the information gets leaked. So you want to control that kind of narrative.
Yeah.
And when you're in control, it's much easier to handle it. So the best way to approach crisis management is just to prevent it.
And prepare everything.
Yeah, just prepare as much as you can. Because when it happens, there is so much chaos. And when chaos appears, it's not consistent. And it will be really hard to manage on spot.
Yeah.
So you want to prepare beforehand.
Usually when it rains, it pours. Great. So now coming more about Drofa Comms and your perhaps success stories, or just about you guys. So what distinguishes Drofa Comms' approach to PR from perhaps other agencies, particularly in the finance and fintech sectors? I know one of them is your niche, your team. Maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that, or just other general distinguishing factors.
Well, there are three things I would say. And I don't want to talk about other PR agencies. I just want to talk about us, of course. So first thing, as you said, we are niche, and that tracks back to our origin. So we've got two co-founders. One of them is a PhD in economics. She has track record in trading. So she is really on the product side, understanding what the businesses that we work with need. The other co-founder, she used to be a financial journalist, so she really understands what the journalists are looking for. So those two things are kind of embedded in our culture, and it's embedded in everything that we do. Then we always say that we're acting in the best interest of the businesses that we work with. So we are never trying to fill in like ticking the box, for example. So we will never come up with a publication that we understand that the client doesn't really need at that particular time. Especially what I'm trying to say is that when you, for example, you sign in the client and you agree on a particular number of publications and the media outreach that you are going to handle in the future. But for example, if the business changes and the focus changes as well, the communication strategy will change with it. So we're very flexible in terms of the business. We're very flexible in understanding what the client needs. We are in touch with them almost 24/7, 24 hours, 7 days a week. And we have so many calls with our clients. We sometimes at some point even get annoying because we have so many questions, just because it is very important for us to act on the best interest of the businesses that we work with. We also work on a really strict KPIs in terms of the number of publications that we need to deliver, because again, we see that consistency plays a vital role here. And even if the company doesn't have, for example, much to say to the market at the moment, we will still come up with our own ideas. So we are proactive in terms of what kind of topics we can talk about this particular month, or what kind of publications we could work with that particular month, even if the company doesn't approach us with those ideas. So yeah, I think this is most important things about Drofa.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that was quite a comprehensive answer as well. You have answered my next question pretty much. Now moving on more to the future of PR and finance and fintech. We talked about the last original PR, digital media PR, but looking ahead, what trends do you foresee in PR for the finance and fintech sectors?
Oh, that's a good question. And I had many quite big experts saying that AI could change it all. I mean, it is changing the way journalists are approaching content, the way PRs are approaching content. We are also including AI to our daily life, and it helps us as content producers a lot.
Yep.
However, it also, I mean, I heard someone say that PRs and journalists are not going to be needed in like 5 years' time or something like that. So it was quite a strict forecast, I would say. And I feel that it's, just coming back to the people who are writing for, they're still consuming content in a very old style way. And even print newspapers are still alive. So if print newspapers are still alive, how can we say that AI is going to change the way journalists are writing? Because the most interesting thing about journalism and PR, it gives people perspective and gives people opinions, and people value opinions. So if all the articles are going to be produced by AI, just means that we will only consume factual information and data. And I mean, that is important. However, opinions of a third party, which are PRs, journalists, and companies themselves, are as important. And as long as they are important for end users, we are pretty much fine.
Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of PR agencies have personal relationships with journalists as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. I mean, PRs need to have personal relationship with journalists, and so many PR agencies do events specifically for journalists, and they meet up and we're actually good friends with many of them. Just because, again, the world of journalism and PR, it is so interconnected. Many journalists act as PR sometimes. Many PRs used to be journalists as well. And it just makes sense, right? Because you know what's happening behind those barriers, because there is no barrier really. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Might just make it more efficient, make the ghost writing more efficient.
And that too, and that too. I mean, again, we are writing to make companies interesting for journalists.
Yeah.
And to understand what journalists are looking for, you need to talk to them. They're people. And that's also part of networking as well, because our network lays within journalists and the businesses. So these are two vital pillars that a PR agency would stand at. And that's what our business stands at as well.
Fantastic. I have two more questions to kind of round off this. The first one is more about your personal journey, and specifically about what advice would you give to individuals aspiring to build a career in PR, where they should start, if there is any way to start. Yeah.
Well, there are lots of ways to start, depending on what a person like. Well, first thing that a person that wants to work in PR, they need to understand what interests them most, because there are so many ways to pursue a career in PR, because you've got to choose if you want to be in-house or you want to be on the agency side. And probably it makes sense to start with the agency side just to understand what kind of areas specifically you're interested in. Because when you're an agency, you are working with various businesses, and you also write and pitch and talk to the journalists, so you can actually understand what interests you most, and then probably go in-house again. Or if you're happy to be on the agency side doing many things at a time, that's also good enough. But yeah, just first thing to understand is what you're actually interested in, because for example, my journey is a bit different from what I described just now. So I started working in automotive industry. So I used to work for Volkswagen, and then I went up for Coca-Cola. So I used to do events and social responsibility events as well, which is completely different from financial PR, of course. But that's my journey, and everybody's different. But the first thing that a person who wants to pursue a career in PR is just to understand what PR is. That's first thing, because many freshly graduates, they don't really understand what communications PR is, and it's probably not discussed as much as many other industries. But yeah, so choose an industry, choose what you want to do in the future, and just go for it.
Great, thank you. And perhaps finally, it's one piece of advice you would give to founders of startups in the finance and the fintech world, but maybe just generally about PR.
Well, there is so many. Okay. Well, the first thing, if we're talking about founders of early stage startups, first thing that you need probably to do is just to find value in what you do, and only then you can actually communicate that. So when you see value in the product that you're doing, in your expertise, you can actually communicate that. And yeah, I mean, an early stage founder, they need to start with your social media. Just start with it. And sometimes I talk to early stage startup founders, and they are struggling of not knowing what to write. And sometimes a good plan is just to start writing, and you will get there. You will understand your tone of voice. You will understand what you're trying to talk about, and just be consistent. Write a content plan for a month, for example. Post, I don't know, 3 times a week, for example. And it could be completely different things, especially if you're just starting. That's all right. That's fine, just to start posting. And when you get your tone of voice, you get your audience, you get more subscribers, for example, then you can go for a more elaborated communication strategy. but never neglect good communications. It can do so much for you in the future. It can help you build relationships in your sector. It can build your client base as well, because everybody who is onboarded on a platform or any kind of company, they're looking for people, and it will also help you hire good talent as well, because they're also included in your HR brand, because they will see who's behind it and they will want to work with you specifically. So yeah, never underestimate good communications.
Okay. Well, look, Masha, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. And for anyone watching, you'll be able to find Masha's details and Drofa.com's details below. And yeah, well, Masha, thank you very much. And let's keep in touch.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Masha.